more on this issue of missing children in South Africa. We're now joined by Clinical Director of the Teddy Bear Foundation, Dr. Shaheda Omar. Dr. Omar, thank you so much for your time. Always a very difficult conversation, this one. I mean, Jocelyn Smith is sadly, as we've seen in that clip, but one of thousands of children who go missing in the country. The 2024 SABC reported over 17,000 kidnappings, some of which linked to human trafficking and missing children or missing persons. I mean, these numbers are staggering. Perhaps let's start with how traffickers and kidnappers typically lure or target children.
Well, if we look at the modus operandi of traffickers, of course, they're going to lure children that are vulnerable, that are needy, that have unmet emotional needs. They're going to prey on this target population. And we know children certainly are always in need of attention, affection, approval, and parents are not always in a position to provide their 24/7. And of course, they use grooming as a method of engaging with the child, where the child is given preferential treatment, focusing a lot of interest in the child, on the child's concerns, worries, hobbies, etc. And that is how they lure children. And of course, with the advent of technology, we are finding that more and more children are online. That 77% of children, even if they don't have their own devices, they have access to devices from other sources, whether it's peers or other forms of access. And your groomers, your perpetrators, your traffickers out there are actually searching for these children. And this is how they entice children, by engaging with them and slowly eroding the barriers, the boundaries, because the child starts providing personal information. Because they share personal information, they validate everything that the child brings to the fore, that the child's concerns, the child feels maybe ignored, doesn't feel adequately loved, feels the abandonment, rejection, all sorts of other issues and worries that are common with children. And this is how we find that your traffickers will engage with children impersonating themselves. Of course, they're not going to give their true identity, appear as a peer, an age mate, and send pictures of themselves, and of course also entice with other opportunities, which is often difficult for a child to then refuse. So that is one of the ways of how they bring children on board. Children start providing that information, they agree to meet, and unfortunately the rest is history, because often these children then disappear into the sunset, often not to be found, as has been articulated, where the 23%, and 23% is not an accurate reflection of the statistics, because there are many other children that have not been reported, and children that have been identified as runaways, or children that have just fled their home. So unfortunately, we are not faced with accurate statistics.
And that even paints a more bleaker picture, because when you consider that of the reported cases, only about 70% are found. And I'm glad you mentioned technology. My next question was going to ask you about the role that, social media and technology plays in both enabling and preventing kidnappings and or trafficking. But since you've, touched on it, how do parents then become even more vigilant, or guardians even, schools, and become more active in terms of what their children are doing on their iPads or even phones, etc., without obviously infringing on the independence of the child?
So, Unati, you ask a very important question, and I think it's not just the parents that we need to empower, enable, and equip on how to manage and monitor the use of devices that their children are exposed to. But we also need to engage with children starting at a very young age, before they even start using technology, around the risks and benefits. And I think parents, of course, if the child is, then there needs to be ground rules on the use of devices, and where there are certain expectations that at a certain time they will be allowed to use the devices. At a certain time, those devices are then put away, where the parents have full access to that, but respecting the privacy. And if the child is of age and is on, say, Facebook, Twitter, where parents on Facebook need to be the friend of the child as well. But it's about continuous dialoguing with children, where children get the feeling that parents are understanding the importance of engaging on social media, but at the same time also respecting the fact that they will be able, they will benefit from engagement with their peers, learning the knowledge, etc. But parents need to dialogue around the benefits, the risk around talking about child trafficking, talking about your sexual predators, talking about all the risks that are out there. Unfortunately, there are so many risks, which it's not to alarm children or to alarm parents, but bring the reality to the fore so that they understand and that they would feel safe and comfortable because parents are engaging with them. They're already giving that permission, that platform, creating a platform that if they come into contact with something that seems unsavory or something that they do not feel comfortable with, they know that they can go back to their parents because that's a safe space. And that is what it's all about, creating that safe space where a child would feel comfortable and free to engage with parents around these challenges. Because often children go into these spaces and not getting that kind of support or direction or guidance from parents. And this is where children fall prey to all the risks out there with traffickers, with your sexual predators, etc.
Yeah, and I want to touch on this point. I mean, you mentioned, of course, the stats not really being reflective of the true numbers. I mean, just looking at those that are kidnapped or do go missing, there are always so many people who are hopeful that their children will be found alive or even unharmed. I mean, what happens to these children after they are rescued, particularly from a legal and even emotional perspective?
Well, I think the most important thing, yes, firstly, is to assess the risk situation, a risk assessment. But it's about, if we look at the emotional containment, because often children are coming to, are tormented and emotionally they collapse. And of course, if we look at the post-traumatic stress disorder, the hypervigilance, the fear of it happening again, avoidance of individuals, avoidance of places, of settings, sensory modalities that trigger these emotions as well. I think those are the things that a victim of trafficking and of abduction or sexual abuse would be faced with. And so the most important thing one would have to look at is psychosocial support to that individual, to the victim or survivor, but also to the family, guiding them on management and coping skills. So it's about enabling them to cope with the situation should triggers happen in the future. I think those are the important things. And also to look at whether the child is at risk, because if there's been negligence in the home, unfortunately, then the child is at risk, the child is in need of care, and alternative care would then have to be provided for the child.
Yeah, Dr. Omar, thank you so much for that. Of course, I really appreciate your analysis on the situation. That was Dr. Shaheda Omar, Clinical Director of the Teddy Bear Foundation.